This car is one of the most important cars of the MG Rover era, a real last throw of the dice. This is the car that could have changed it all, a real mid-range heavy hitter. Co-engineered by TWR, the Rover RDX60 was truly the last chance for MG Rover. Largely forgotten now, this car lays rotting in the shell of the former Longbridge plant, but how did we get here? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover the story of the MG RDX60 and Rover RD60 program. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure to do so and watch these other videos on these insane prototypes and get involved, because we really need as much attention on this as possible, because this car that I'm about to talk to you about today is one of the most important cars to the MG Rover story, and arguably one of the most important what-ifs in British motoring history. So drop a comment below and let me know your opinion on it, and join our little fight, I guess, to save these Longbridge prototype. One of the most mysterious cars of the MG Rover days was its last true chance at success, the MG Rover RDX60 program, or Project Nexus as it was called in its later stages. After BMW dismembered Rover Group, taking Mini, Land Rover, and most importantly of all, the new in-development mid-range heavy hitter, the R30 project, which was supposed to be the replacement for the Rover 200 and 400 models, which some say ended up becoming the BMW 1 Series, there wasn't much left for the newly formed MG Rover, other than its current lineup of cars. Of course, the brilliant Rover 75, which had received much praise in the media, did not have the consumer confidence it needed, more than likely down to BMW's then chairman giving it a good bashing in the press and giving Rover a good thrashing as well in the press, which ended up with a slump in sales. The Rover 75, the last chance saloon, had unfortunately become not enough to save the ailing MG Rover. Sadly, with the departure and loss of the R30 program, a new mid-size car project was needed. But without significant funding, which of course was not possible due to the dire finances of MG Rover at the time, they fell back to predictable old tricks, which was tapping already available resources, one of which is known as the parts bin, which of course, given the finances of the company, was completely logical at the time. The car would be based on the Rover 75 with the complex and expensive BMW Z-axle, which the company would have had to pay licensing for, removed to save cost, with a less complex rear trailing arm system proposed instead. Under the leadership of John Tweedy, who had led the Project Oyster team to produce the Rover 45, the plans were set in motion. This car would cover the mid-range of the Rover and MG lineup. The proposed models were the Rover RD60 with 3 and 5 door Rover hatchbacks, as well as the RD61 and 62, which were the saloon and tourer models. The X models were MG and would follow the similar model lineup. The situation at MG Rover with regards to the prospects of new models was pretty grim, however. With the sale of Land Rover, which included the Gauge and Design Studio by BMW, the design capacities of the newly formed Midlands car giant was greatly diminished. This resulted in a small team being put together and the Product Design Centre being formed at Longbridge to lead the development of new cars. Unfortunately, the cash-strapped MG Rover didn't have the necessary funds to provide the newly formed internal design studio with the much-needed resources to make it a success. However, at the time, MG Rover were preoccupied, naturally, by the introduction of the MG Z range, which I believe kept the company afloat up until 2005, and the 75 Tourer production, so the much-needed resources were not committed to the project, not like they had the resources to do this at the time anyway. It was then decided what MG Rover needed was a partnership. And with its previous partnerships, there was only one thing to go for when it came to car development. That was TWR. The project then progressed at a feverish pace after the TWR introduction.
CAD renderings were produced, and the styling team created a number of proposals, resulting in the January 2002 Rover RD60 project/prototype model being produced. The project then went into its advanced stages, with one engineer reporting that the tooling and presses were already completed for the metalwork, with many suppliers creating this tooling for the 3 and 5 door models. TWR were also nearing completion for CAD proposals for the specific components for the 4 door and the Tourer specific components. MG Rover were so impressed by TWR's work, they awarded the complete project to them in January 2002, which meant that TWR was not just responsible for the engineering part of the program, they were responsible for everything: project management, costs, targets, purchasing, everything that comes with the production and development of a new model. The project then gained even more pace. In February of 2003, the MG RDX60 hatchback, the 5-door model, was produced in its prototype form, and some say this was the final form of the first iteration of the RDX60. This, however, resulted in something rather curious happening. Yes, that's right, MG Rover froze the project, which kind of put it on the back burner, and it made little to no progress at all. TWR, unfortunately, were in a bad state. With this loss of revenue and a number of other factors, TWR's administration was inevitable that year, and we lost one of the most incredible giants of automotive design and engineering and racing this country has ever known. The loss of TWR was a disaster for the project, resulting in it being halted indefinitely. This didn't stop MG Rover, however, showing the final prototype, the green car, to the dealers in this now famous set of photographs taken in November of 2003 in the Longbridge Conference Centre. Apparently, the fully built RDX60 was driven onto the Conference Centre stage and described in detail by the man himself, Peter Stevens. The car was powered by a KV6 engine and had a manual gearbox, and was essentially a rebodied, modified Rover 75. The interior was angular and brutalist, with a steering wheel reminiscent of a Vauxhall Vectra. Because the works by TWR and the Product Design Centre were in its advanced to final stages, most of the work had already been completed. This led to MG Rover's talks with China Brilliance on the possibility of a joint venture. But as talks progressed, it became apparent that this deal did not hold the keys to the RDX60's completion and introduction, but was just a measure to keep the massive company operating by selling its products rebadged in China. However, this deal fell through and left MG Rover searching for another partner. If this deal was to go ahead, this car would have been launched in late 2007. Therefore, the design department at MG Rover, headed up by Peter Stevens himself, was tasked with updating the RDX60 to keep it current with the market at the time. The RDX60 was in such advanced stages that the roadmap was already laid out, with the build dates, the launch dates and the production dates, and even the end of production date being in 2010. Purchasing had already been advised in regards to materials and costs and other key things for this project. However, this was not to be. And in April of 2005, MG Rover collapsed with the loss of the last British-owned large volume car manufacturer. What of the RDX60 now, you may ask? And why do I keep banging on about a car park? Well, we'll explain that now. There were 3 RDX60s produced. One was the clay model, shown here. This is unfortunately believed to have been destroyed. You can't save them all. Then there was another model, which we believe to be a fiberglass model. This is shown only in Peter Stevens' design studio and is believed to have been destroyed also. There is, however, one fully functioning car based on the Rover 75 with a KV6 engine that can be driven, that is working, and is currently stored at Longbridge. This car was at the back of the conference centre, covered with the blue curtains for quite some time. It was then moved to another area. It's believed to have been the Elephant House or the Roundhouse. Now, in August of 2003, it was spotted outside of the factory. Yes, this car still exists after radio silence for 4 years. This car is now sat outside of Longbridge, open to the elements, and in quite a questionable state. This car is currently boxed in by some of the new MGs, and it's a damn shame. We need to contact MG's PR to make sure this isn't the last part of the RDX60's story, it waiting for its eventual destruction or vandalism, which is the worst case scenario. We have to work together to help preserve this. Contact whoever you need to contact respectfully, and let's make this happen. Let's preserve one of the last pieces of British motoring history, produced by one of the last large volume car manufacturers owned by the British MG Rover.